You're listening to a podcast from DCT Audio. I'm Dave Thomas, and I've been producing audio content for over 10 years. Thank you for listening to this edition of the programme. I do hope you enjoy it. For several years now, the levels of mental health and well-being within the UK police have been in decline. Many will argue that this is a result of an ever-increasing workload, a reduction in capacity and experience, underfunding, and a perception that social and mainstream media proactively portray a negative narrative of law enforcement within the UK. Additionally, lenient sentencing, poor organisational practices, and the disproportionate time spent on officers under investigation have contributed to create a perfect storm. In this short series of podcasts, I will be looking at the rising trend of police officers taking their own lives. I will be speaking with a variety of people to put a spotlight on police suicide, the reasons behind it, and hopefully how we can halt its rise. Well, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Andy Rhodes OBE QPM. Andy, you're a welcome return to the podcast.
Thanks for the invite, Dave.
It was a long time ago, December 2016, I think.
Really?
It was that long ago. And I suspect a lot has changed since then, and we will talk about that. We have a few things in common. We're both retired police officers, and we both did our service in Lancashire Constabulary. I retired in March 2022. When did you go?
April 21.
You were the Chief Constable then of Lancashire Constabulary. You were also the MPCC Wellbeing Lead for England and Wales. Now, knowing you as I do, I suspect that you've not taken retirement lying down. So what have you been up to since you left the job?
I'm full-time on wellbeing, really, not just in the Oscar Kilo stuff. That's the main thing I do, helping out with them, which is something I'm very passionate about. Spend most of my time now dealing with this. I'm a bit of an anorak on it. It's something I'm passionate about, and do a lot of work to try to change government policy around things. So, moving from where we have been to where we need to be, which is this stuff is guaranteed and mandated, which is something that more and more people are agreeing with now. Outside of that, I've got 4 grandchildren. I do a couple of voluntary things. There's a charity that help out with every now and again that is Every Action Has Consequences, which is a charity set up by the parents of a young lad called Adam Rogers, who was murdered when I was over in Blackburn, the chief super, and some great ex-police officers and others who still help out with that charity to take it from strength to strength. And I've done a little bit of work trying to help them as an ambassador. And another thing that I've done for a long time, actually, there's an international group of people who support people of victims of mass casualty events and terrorism events. I am on there around the first responders, because we call first responders second victims, right, for those big events. That's a global group. It's a voluntary thing. Don't get on there as often as I would like to because I'm busy on the other stuff, but they're an amazing group of people.
If you have been a police officer or are still serving, then you will have heard of Oscar Kilo. But for the people that haven't heard of it, just tell us a bit of a background around Oscar Kilo, and I suppose as well how the landscape has changed from when it was set up to where we are now.
Well, about 10 years ago, we were set up a working group about this thing called wellbeing, right, which nobody even was talking about it at the time. And you and I have been in the job a long time, Dave, and nobody was talking about mental health and wellbeing in the 90s or the early 2000s. And that working group went from strength to strength because we realised there was a need. What you've got in policing in England and Wales is 43 forces, and they tend to all do things slightly differently. And so there's a need to understand primarily what the research was about the problem and what needed to be done about it. And so initially we did a lot of work with experts in the field all over the world, actually. We share this with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the States particularly, to find out what was the depth of the problem, what needed to be done about it, and what employers, chief constables, and the Home Office, MPCC, College of Policing need to do to support them. And that took quite a bit of time. It's quite a complicated thing, wellbeing. It relates to a lot of different things. It's just not one thing that's driving wellbeing. And we got a Police Transformation Fund grant around 2019 which was £2.5 million, and I was still a chief then. From Lancashire, we set up, we've got a fleet of 12 vehicles. Each of those vehicles is a fully kitted out vehicle with its 100 grand's worth of kit. They rotate around the country all year round doing health checks. And forward deployed to major incidents 35% of the time. They've just been up to Scotland for the big visit up there, 4 of them. Came back full of mud. 2 of them are permanently deployed in the Met. That was one of the big things that we did initially, was to take health checks to where people who work shifts can access them. Not just health checks, but health campaigns, health promotion. These vans have got counselling areas in the back of them. They've got fridges in, and we've done about 70,000 visits to these vans in 2 years. So that's a big, visible thing of what we do. But after that, we started developing training courses, self-assessment frameworks for forces that are put into the inspection process, and also commissioning the annual survey and commissioning 5,000 psychological risk assessments for high-risk roles, decent image viewing teams, child protection, firearms, negotiators. So the service started to commission things that were done once nationally. The main work is working with all those 43 forces to help get them in good shape, because that's where the work gets done on the ground. In fact, the vans, when they turn up at a force, we don't staff them. We drop them off, and the force put their teams in to do the health checks and stuff. And every force in the country gets them for about 2 weeks a year to do that. It's a £16 billion sector, and we've got £2.5 million a year. We then ended up working, the Federation wanted a covenant, like the Armed Forces Covenant, and we did a lot of work on that. So I've got heavily involved in that because I'm quite passionate about it. It's not got off the ground completely yet, like the Armed Forces Covenant has, but it's worth hanging in there with, because effectively it's in statute that the well-being of police officers and staff, physical and psychological protection, and their families and those who've left, which we've never done a lot about in British policing, are a priority for whatever government of the day. And that's something that we need to hang on to and work with. So I've been keeping pretty busy altogether, Dave, to be honest.
Now, you mentioned the budget, £2 million. There has been criticism of late regarding Oscar Kilo, the argument being that well-being is getting worse, not better, despite Oscar Kilo being around. And I think it's important to point out the purpose of Oscar Kilo, because you're essentially an advisory body. Am I right?
Well, originally, yeah, we were just a What Works outfit, so commissioning research, self-assessment frameworks. And I guess, it comes with the territory of wellbeing. I did this in my own force, as you know. There is a lot to do, and it's a very complex area of work. And there isn't enough resource applied to it, in total. If you look at what Oscar Kilo does, criticism's fine, right? People have an opinion about anything. I'm not really interested in anyone's opinion if they don't actually know what we do, because it's not a well-informed opinion. I think the argument of, well, things are getting worse, what's Oscar Kilo achieving, is a good point. Some days with wellbeing, you feel as though you're making 1 step forward and 2 steps back. I'll be honest with you do, because an individual's experience in a police force can be affected by a variety of different things that you have no control over. And what we know now, Dave, is, you see, we've got evidence of this, not just from this country, but from all over the world in law enforcement and policing, that it's not actually the police work primarily that is making people ill. That does make you ill. It makes some people very seriously ill, tragically ill from time to time, right? And it's not good for your health, shift working, trauma exposure, yada, yada, yada. But actually, all the evidence is that people cope quite well with that, and they know that's what police work entails. What's pushing people into real poor health issues and also issues around retention is organisational stuff. Yeah, it is whether or not how you're running your organisation, it is supporting that individual. And people, there's fairness, is the discrimination, how's change managed, resources, workload, line manager, culture, and I've got the annual survey here. If people ask what Oscar Kilo does, what it does is it rocks the boat without being thrown out of it. If you want to influence that level, you've got to be able to get facts, not just opinion. And what we do is we've brought research, evidence and facts, and particularly the annual survey, the one that we've done this year, about the 5th one we've done, that is being seen by the most senior people who make decisions in policing and they are taking notice of it. 42,000 people responded to this survey. That is big. And the stuff that's in it, and I've got, this is fact, this is data, tells you that the things that are burning people out are driven within the organisation itself. And that is fact, right? So Oscar Kilo doesn't have a direct influence on how a police force works. But what we do is we pick up where the good forces are and what people are doing well. And we share that along a lot of networks that we've got, annual conference, awards, all this sort of stuff, where we point to, well, actually somebody over here seems to be getting somewhere with that problem. You know, if I was to say to you, Dave, right, when you joined the job, did you have enough resource?
Well, there's never enough patrols, is there?
Well, no. So this is my point, right? So I joined in 1991, and I can remember turning out in my area with 2 of us on nights. I can remember policing the whole of Blackpool with 5 or 6 of us on. Right? There'll be people maybe listening to this who used to work with me. They know we were very thin on the ground then. Okay, people say the job's changed. What I'm saying is that I cannot remember in my 30 years of police service ever, whatever rank I've been at, feeling as I had enough people to do the job properly. That is the nature of the beast. People are generally overloaded with workload. There's never enough resource to go around. And you sort of see what's happening at the moment. People going on public order deployments. They're just getting taken out of ordinary policing. So those other people have to do more overtime, carry more workload, etc., etc. There are some of these issues that are organisational, that are enduring issues in the emergency services, not just policing. And that's something that needs to be recognised. Yeah, they are beyond the control of what is a relatively, small but important function like Oscar Kilo. What we're doing is we're saying we're there at the table now, which we weren't 10 years ago. In COVID, we provided all the welfare support to the COVID Gold Group for 2 years. There was all sorts of things going on in COVID that required the operational side of the business to realise there was an impact on the health of the workforce. And that's a big thing that we did. And we continue to do it for big national operations as well. We're doing it at the moment for what's going on. We did it last year after, what happened in Southport. And I'll give you a small example, Dave, right? That you know what it's like in policing. It's like every day it's what we're dealing with today. There's a lot of pressure. Every day of the week there's pressure about things happening, no notice events. People are just waiting to see whether that big event happens, right? You've done it. You've worked a lot of road policing, right? You sat there, aren't you, waiting for that awful job to happen. Hypervigilance, right? So policing is hypervigilant all the time. And, last year during the riots, it was summer. There were as many officers in hospital with dehydration as there were with assaulted with bricks. My point is, when I'm presenting to Gold Commander courses, which I do every month, I'm dialing to Gold national groups. I'm saying hydration. It sounds obvious. You tell me whether it's easy or not to hydrate as a frontline police officer or member police staff. We have got dehydrated people working the front line. If you go into science of hydration, you wouldn't get on a rugby pitch with the levels of dehydration that we've got. And it's a simple thing that needs to be thought about. So when you ask us what we've done, we've reviewed our major incident wellbeing guidance after last year with the HMRC recommendations, and we've written gold, silver, bronze checklist. This is what your job is. This is your first priorities. Go to A&E department. Have you got your bloodborne virus protocol sorted out? What about hydration? What about this? Are you with me? We've literally written a list for people to do that, and that is presented to every Gold Commander's course. It's circulated to every force in the country. It helps, is what I'm saying. Are you with me? So we have got to lead horses to water and help them drink. They're busy people. They've got a lot of other things to do. But this voice always on the shoulder of the health of your people is directly affected by what you're doing, and it's relevant to how well you conduct that policing operation. It's probably the most important thing, but it's the last thing that people tend to think about.
Well, it nicely brings us on to the fact that you can only make recommendations and suggestions. And there is a lot of talk at the moment, and I'm sure you'll agree with the people, that well-being needs to be mandated, needs to be put on a legal footing within police forces.
So we've got a chief medical officer now, which we didn't have. Then Oscar Kilo funds that post. We created that post with the Home Office and the MPCC and the college. And that's a game changer for policing. We haven't had one before. We missed it in COVID. And he's already set occupational health standards, which people are working towards, because that's a really challenging area. When it comes to the standards and the mandation, this is my take on it, right, Dave? People go, oh, well, mandate it, make it, there's no point mandating something if people, A, don't know what to do or how to do it, and they haven't got the resource to do it. Because lots of stuff's mandated, it doesn't get done, right? It's not a magic wand. People shouting about mandate it, making them do it. You've got to be able to, if you mandate something, provide them with the support to enable them to achieve whatever you're mandating. So what we've done is, we started off developing APP, Authorised Professional Practice for Wellbeing, and with the agreement of the college and the MPCC, we've translated that into prioritisation guidance, and there are 6 key areas there. It's already out there, this stuff. The HMIC are aware of it, and that could well be raised its status in the police reform agenda. We hope it is, but there are no surprises for forces in there, and everything that's in that those 6 areas. I'll give you an example. One of the areas is trauma support model. We need to have an agreed whole system of trauma support in every force that's consistent. Not just a great intervention here and a great intervention there. It's like all the right notes, not necessarily the right order. It needs to be well organised, and you need to understand that it starts when people join, it moves through the service, and it should follow them through when they leave the service. It involves family support, leavers transitioning support out, all sorts of different touch points. We know what that is, and we want to work with forces to get that into place. Some are very good already. They know all the pieces of the jigsaw, and they're in the right place. Some are less so. Trauma support, fatigue risk management, suicide prevention, these are all things that are in what we hope will be mandated. But Oscar Kilo has got to be able to provide training, some systems like the mental health crisis line. We need to provide them systems to support them around more psychological risk assessments, because more of those need to be done. But that is a big step up for forces to increase what we've currently got, what we should be doing. It's no good just saying mandate something without being able to say, here's the resource and the support to enable you to do it, or it won't get done.
It's interesting, isn't it? A former colleague, Andy Cook, who's the head of the HMIC FRS, they're looking to get their inspections mandated on a legal footing, because they are just recommendations. So that would be interesting. And because if well-being is an inspection, it is mandated, then forces will be legally obliged to perhaps put into some of the things that you've suggested to them.
It's interesting, Dave. So this, I think, is a good topic, but we've said, right, okay, we know what it is that needs to be done. We just need to do it. And what we've said is that our prioritisation guidance sets out what is the legal duty of care for an employer for the people who work in this type of environment. That's evidence-based, it's research-based, there's no big surprise in there. Most people listening to this would recognise what we're talking about in that guidance. When we say legal footing, what the legal duty of care is. If you ask the HSE, right, the HSE exists to improve health and safety for everything from Bob the Builder to the police. What you've got to do is you've got to look at things like coroner's reports after suicides, prevention of future death. I gave evidence for 3 hours at an inquest of an officer that had sadly taken his own life, because the coroner wanted to know, what should this force have been doing?
And that's really important, because forces aren't recording data, are they?
We are still not recording suicides to the level of detail that we should be doing, so that we can learn from them. Some forces are a lot better than others at managing postvention, which we've done a lot of work with the Samaritans about postvention. They're a lot better at managing that really sensitive emotional period of time when we lose a colleague to suicide. And, we've all lost colleagues and friends to suicide. I think a lot of people are touched by that, right? So you look at employment tribunals, the vast majority are mental health related. They are mental health discrimination, that type of stuff. That isn't to shroud wave. What we're saying is, look, we work for the employer, Oscar Kilo, because we're advising them and helping them with training courses and systems and whatever to achieve that standard and make sure you've got the duty of care in place. We also support individuals in policing more than we used to do, because we've now commissioning big services like a mental health crisis line. That is something that we need desperately. We've had calls. It's probably confidential, but it's going to save lives. So if you're going to look at us launching that, and riding on the back of it and say, well, we wouldn't need it if Oscar Kilo did its job properly and everyone else did its job properly. I think that's a really unhelpful way to come in on the back of something so positive and well needed. We've got to be kinder to each other around this. There are people out there who need to be encouraged to call that line. They don't want to see on social media a lot of conflict going on about it. One of the things that this national survey says, Dave, what's the prevalence of you being abused and discriminated by the public? And what's the prevalence of you being abused and discriminated by your own colleagues? And sadly, the statistics are quite close together. It's like one of those things, let's get our own house in order here. And if you're different, it's even worse. If you're neurodiverse, if you're a woman, if you're LGBT, if you're black minority ethnic, we've got to get the culture, the leadership, the environment to a better place than it currently is, because that is not helping. Because people's cups are very full from the job that they're doing, right? That is something that we can influence around, but ultimately that work's got to be done force by force, and some are actually nailing it. The differences in the performers on this survey, which aren't disclosed, that's for those forces to share their data, right? It's a GDPR issue. There is plenty of places to go and say, well, you seem to be doing better than me on this. How are you doing it? What are you doing different than I'm doing? Because you're getting better results according to the workforce. Very powerful stuff.
That's interesting, because I don't mind admitting that for 6 months while I was in the job, I struggled and took 6 months off work, a combination of personal trauma, I suppose, bereavement, and just the general grind of the job. I have to say, I was treated brilliantly by the organisation. But I know of colleagues that have had an awful experience with the same organisation. And I'm just wondering why that is. It can't be down to policy. It must be down to individuals. They say your line manager is your most important, makes or breaks your job, doesn't it? Your work experience.
Big time. And the survey that we've done actually reports, one of the positives in it is that people really do feel supported by line management, 78% or something like that. And they go to line management and the colleagues for welfare support. They don't go to occupational health, OSCE or EAPs as much. So your experience, you're on a specialist team. Specialist teams are tighter generally. The supervision tends to be more static, in my experience. When you're in different other roles, if you've been ill or injured and you come off the hamster wheel and out of your shift and you come back on restricted duties, you can end up floating around and feeling very isolated, and you lose connection to that team, and social connection, which is absolutely bread and butter to your well-being.
One of the reasons I did have a good experience was that everybody from head of crime down to my DS, I kind of grown up with in the job. I do wonder sometimes what I did in my career when I look at some people that are the chief supers. And I think that made the difference, because we all knew each other, and it was a case of, well, Dave's gone off ill. We know Dave. This is serious. And I'm sure that had something to do with it.
I think there's, well, Dave, in any big organisation, it's not just policing, right? Sometimes policy comes before people. The computer says no. I've seen numerous cases in my own force. Now I was hammering the wellbeing. Looking back, there's things I could have done differently, but I don't think I can be faulted for saying it was important. I'm trying to walk the talk on it. And when I got to the position I could make an influence, right, I regularly saw absolutely awful treatment of people. I won't mention them here now because I'll probably get sued. There is stuff there, Dave, that you see the email from the member of staff and you're reading it and your head is in your hands thinking, I'm in charge of this place. What do I need to do to stop this sort of unfair treatment happening? It is quite often because we've stopped thinking of the individual as a human being and we see them as a role, a number on a spreadsheet, a statistic. We stop looking at them as human beings and looking at their uniqueness, because I think in a big organisation, Dave, that's very fast-paced and very reactive and focused on operational stuff, it's quite easy to forget. It's quite difficult, to personalise and individualise stuff. Those people knew you, so they knew when you weren't well, there was something up. If you don't know somebody and you've not got that connection to somebody, then nobody's really taking any interest in your personal circumstances, which are very unique. This is the thing with wellbeing, right? It's not all related to work. Your early life experiences, your personal life outside of work. There's so many different things playing into it. Yeah, your personality traits, the way your illness is manifested in you is it's driven you to do something purposeful. You don't appear to me to be bitter and twisted. A lot of people go down the other route, and I understand that. Yeah, I've felt a bit bitter and twisted in my service from time to time, right, when things haven't gone right. That is quite common in policing. And for the people who are working on the other end of this, the dedicated people in occupational health teams and things like that, and I know these people work their socks off, right, and they care. I was talking to one of a police service in the States yesterday, fairly reasonably sized police force, and she said, the police officers, we've put a psychologist in. He hangs around on parades to break down barriers and all this sort of stuff. And he said, the abuse that he's got and the mistrust and the scepticism, he's quite shocked. There's a part of police culture that is difficult to shift. I get it because I've been in it. I'm still part of that culture to some degree. So are you. But I think it takes a certain type of person not to walk away from it, to hold that space, even when people have been not very nice to you, and not be judgmental. Why did this good cop end up so unhappy, resentful? What's the journey that they've been on? And, I'm a big believer in prevention, because I think a lot of those cases would have been avoided if a more humanistic element had been put into the treatment of those people and the support for those people. As I say, Lancashire Constabulary, 6,000 people. I remember once getting a message. We were talking about well-being. We had the open chat room and we're there, which could be brutal for the senior people.
I remember on our first podcast, you'd said that you'd replied to a message that was on Buzz, and then I think your wife said you shouldn't have said that, and you ended up apologising.
I did, yeah, and very, very sobering. What you see in our survey, Dave, is that when you ask at different ranks, how well do you think this organisation is doing for victims or its own people? There is a huge difference in perspective. You've got senior people, 80, 90%, yeah, we're doing a good job. When it gets down to constables, it's about 18%. I mean, that's the leadership gap. Things like staff engagement breaks that gap down. There's so many filters about what's really going on in the workplace to the people who are making the big decisions. But it's tough work. Toughest thing I've ever done, because you're trying to do your best, and then you get somebody on going, you're talking about well-being, Mr. Rhodes. I'm an indecent image viewer. Let me tell you how my day goes. I sit in a booth and watching indecent images. That doesn't make me feel good. And at the end of the day, I go straight home. I live 2 miles from work, and I can't go near my own children. My family know this. I've got an office upstairs, play music, come back down. What are you doing for my well-being? That's a shocker. And the person in charge of this department was a brilliant person. You know her, we all know her, she cares. She was shocked. Because she's not doing that work, and we haven't got psychological safety to speak up. If you don't have that, you're never going to be able to fix these things. And that led to a complete change in how those people were supported to do their job from that comment. Nobody tell me that staff engagement isn't important. More important than research, more important than any other data. It's not all true, because some of it's opinion and perception, right? And people can have the say, but they can't always have the way. But if you're not listening to people where the work is, wherever that is, as a senior person, you are going to be out of touch, and you're not going to know actually what you need to be doing as a leader to help them do their job without getting ill and do the best job for the public.
When an officer joins the police force, they are taught defensive tactics. They are given stab vests, asps, parva. So the job's looking after them. They've got a responsibility for their physical well-being. But do they have a responsibility for their mental well-being? And that brings a further question of, whose responsibility is it? Is it the individual, or is it the organisation?
When you and I first joined, you turned out in a pair of shirt sleeves. You had to buy your own shoes in your handcuff pouch, and you had a little wooden stick in your pocket. And there were still people with knives and guns around. We've really improved physical protection in the police. Mental health, psychological protection is lagging behind. Not just in policing, it's in every business, but policing, right, throws a lot more at your mind. As we know, right, it's high emotional labour. It's difficult work. What we're saying is that we need to be, first thing that we need to do is every year, mandatory, any operational facing role in policing, that includes a lot of police staff, because they're very isolated, not just police officers. They should have an annual, what I call check-up from the neck up. Not a test, it's a, how are you doing? And that should be something, we already do those for 50,000 people across policing, right? Officer Kilo pays for 5,000 of them, and they're the high risk roles. But actually, when you look at the evidence, they're not as high risk as the ones that aren't getting it. New recruits, response officers, people who are running around and not getting time to be supervised, as well as people in tighter teams, etc. And so we need to go from 50,000 to about 150, 160,000 of those. The second thing that comes with that, Dave, is what we call trauma tracking. There are several forces trying this. West Yorkshire Police have got a grant that's going to nail this one on, where basically we use data from the control room using Dr. Jess Miller's PTEC category, a basket of incidents that you say, right, these are high trauma incidents. We'd all recognise what they are. And you use the data to identify heat maps where certain teams are getting a bad run. And you are allowed to reach out to those teams and offer early support. Some forces are having a really good bash at this, to be honest, but nobody's nailing that down. Now, if that was every time you got out of the car, you were punched in the face, you'd have to put a report in. If it was a serious punch, you'd be putting a RIDDOR report in, serious injury. The punch to your mind isn't being recorded. And so further down the line, what you find is that people have exposed to horrendous levels of trauma. I was talking to the Bryn Hughes, the father of Nicola Hughes, who Fiona Bone was murdered by Dale Cregan. The colleagues that attended that, horrendous. More than one. And one of the officers, Bryn, brought to my office once when I was in the job to do the one show. And she had just collapsed with her PTSD in the office, had to take A&E. It was absolutely shocking. What happens in policing, Dave, is people forget you've done that stuff, even those big jobs. And then you go to another department, you get another line manager, and it's just Dave's new day. Are you with me? I've spoken to people who've witnessed awful things and then they've been put back in the environment. And we've got to get better at realising that we need to be able to track this exposure, check people up every year, and we need to be demonstrating that that level of trauma exposure is akin to being physically assaulted. And that is something that the Fed and other people are passionately trying to do. What we're going to do is we're working already with a national trauma support group to pick up these things and say to every force, right, you now need to have that in place. If you're not tracking traumatic events, you're not legal. If you're not doing annual checkups for people who are operational facing, you're not legal. Now that's a big step for us to take, right? And people can challenge that all they like. I'm telling you now, that is the standard of nailed down, consistent support for psychological health. That's just two elements I'm talking about. There's lots of other things as well. What I'm saying is, if you want to get the status of this raised, and actually for it to happen, you've got to be able to do stuff nationally to give to forces so it doesn't have to be done 43 times. And that's our job. Burnout in policing, average rate 45%. This is 42,000 people. NHS 30%. Found your work to be emotionally exhausting. Policing 48%. NHS 34%. Similar survey questions. It's not a walk in the park. It's a tough environment, right? Have you come to work when you did not feel it well enough to perform your duties? This is the questions Oscar Kilo are asking, right? Supported by 33 forces have done this survey. People are passionate about doing this survey. 35% often or always. When you add in sometimes another 38%, that's 75 odd percent, nearly everybody. Felt fatigue or physically exhausted at work, 55% often or always. If you add in sometimes, that's another 29%. There's only 18% not, barely or never. But what's happening is, Dave, when people are exhausted, nobody goes into work and says, oh, yeah, I'm exhausted, can I recover? They go in and say, I'm stressed, anxious, depressed because I'm exhausted. And then they sent quite often down a psychological therapy pathway. And we know from some of the big charities that they've reviewed the causes of people accessing the services. And one big charity, half of the people who were getting psychological therapy were there because there was some work-related issue that needed fixing, not trauma. Or they were just exhausted. Now, therapists don't fix exhaustion. Are you with me? They don't fix the fact you're being bullied, or you didn't get that promotion because somebody's mate got it ahead of you, right? Or you don't like the new software package that they've bought, which is a major event in Lancashire, as we know. That sent some people completely off the edge, So the other one, though, right, found it difficult to empathise with colleagues or family due to demands of your job. 29% always, 27% sometimes. Found it difficult to empathise with victims of crime due to the demands of your job. If you want to talk about the business case for wellbeing, it's not absence. It's people who are in work. These are all coming to work, these people. This isn't a survey of people who are off sick. 27% and then 24% sometimes. That's half people struggling to empathise.
Obviously, I've been retired a couple of years now, but there was always an opinion that you were to go to a supervisor and say you were having problems. Invariably, that would make things worse, not better. I don't know if that's changed, but I want to just tell you this because it was from a blog, from a scuba diving blog. He was a world-renowned diver. Went down to about 60 metres with his team, which was quite deep. We were getting into technical diving there. And anyway, his regulator failed and he nearly drowned. And he was on his own because the rest of the team had ascended without him. And he made a non-negotiable rule after that everybody ascends together. But there was one single solitary reason why they did that, because they knew he was an expert and could look after himself. What he said was, and he said, that's when I learned the most dangerous assumption in leadership. Competence makes you invisible when you need help the most. And it's all about carrying on. Well, Dave's fine. We've asked him, are you all right? Yeah, of course I'm all right, when they're not.
In our culture, competence is king and queen, isn't it? We are understandably focused on competence, right? But you are about your dentist, aren't you? Nobody wants to go to an incompetent dentist, do they? And I think, but in policing, there is other professions like this as well. There's such a focus on competence because we need to do that we overlook the compassion side of it and self-compassion. It's not something that you're encouraged to look at. I think more and more people are now. I see people, very different people in leadership roles than I saw 10 or 15 years ago. And that starts to make a difference. They've had their experiences, but also they are more competent at this stuff, wellbeing. So what we're talking about now, not just in this country is, and not just in policing actually, if you're a leader or a manager in any organisation in the world, you need to understand workplace health issues and how to operate as a leader to mitigate the effect of work on your people. Some of that is about your own style and your own approachability, but it's also knowledge of the subject. What we don't want, this is a bee in my bonnet, Dave, we don't want people who don't understand the menopause to be having clumsy conversations with female colleagues about the menopause. It is a sensitive thing to talk to people about their health. They don't have to talk to you about it. It's private. Being confident in the language of health and having the personal qualities to be approachable to people. So they do come to you, like you might have gone to your sergeant and said, look, I need to word you. And the survey says that I think it's about 70% of staff report that their supervisor really is supportive about the wellbeing. I'm telling you now, if people say things aren't changing, Dave, right? My first 3 sergeants were not supportive about my wellbeing. In fact, I can't remember hardly any people I've had as line managers really until I got further up the ranks that were bothered that much about my wellbeing. That's probably unfair, actually. I think it wasn't something that we explicitly talked about, but I would never have gone to see a sergeant say I was struggling. I didn't take a day off sick in 30 years, but I was ill a lot because you had to put your sick record on your promotion application or for a specialist course. That thing in itself, which I understand why it's done, doesn't encourage people. It encourages people to stay at work when they're really ill, and then things escalate.
Finally, and I'm going back to the very first podcast that we did. It was the very first question I asked you, and you were introducing change into the police force. And I asked you, are the workforce with you, and particularly your SMT team? And you gave a very honest answer. And you said that proportion of the workforce are early adopters, and they take it on. Then you've got another proportion that probably peer pressure. I can see that the colleagues are doing it, so they'll have to do it as well. And then you said there was just a proportion of the workforce that just need to retire. I've never forgotten that. Have we moved on from that? Have we got rid of the people that just need to retire?
Probably not. I think there is it's not just in policing this, Dave. There's a general mindset that all this stuff, people are making it up. Just put your shoulders back and get on with it. And that's in general life, actually. I see a lot of it now in the narrative, in the media. My take on it is that, if you look at the real cutting edge organisations, that if they don't do this stuff, they go out of business. The big globals, they are maxing out on this stuff. because they have got to attract talent, retain talent, and make profits. In some of our organisations, there's no profit to be made. I see people waving away, that how many people are off sick. It's not coming out of their pocket. So the financial stuff isn't really visible. Add to that actually most people are staying in work when they're ill. I see a lot of people still in denial about that. But what I would say is there are far more people who have a totally different attitude to workplace health now than in 2016. Totally different. Because we're on a journey, right? We're playing catch up with this, but we're on a journey. And those people have been exposed to training. They've probably had their own issues and felt more comfortable to talk about them. They've got a voice more than they used to have, in most places. And actually, when you talk about the services and the interventions around people, policing does okay, actually, compared to a lot of other sectors. It's not nowhere near as consistent as it should be. And sometimes it's just totally inadequate. But actually, if we did everything that we know we need to do really well, we'd be doing fine.
And the other thing is that your current crop recruitment of officers, I think, are far less inclined to put up with stuff. So, we are seeing UK policing across the board. We're seeing a lot of resignations. People have just had enough, and just a few years in. I don't know about you. I can't think of anybody I knew that resigned early. Everybody saw their tenure out. But now people are going after 5 years.
This is another one, Dave. I'll be a bit controversial with it. Do you know what the average turnover rate for all businesses in the UK is? 34%. So 1 in 3 people are changing jobs every 12 months. I mean, you've got catering in that. Call centres that have got big turnover rates, We've been 3% forever in policing, and that was people retiring at 30 years. That's what the 3% was. We recruited a load of new people with Uplift in COVID, 60,000 new officers in something like 4 or 5 years, getting on for nearly half of the police officers in policing were recruited, turned over in 5 years. And we have got a different attitude to how long people are going to stay in work. Full stop. In any business, any organisation. What policing's doing is falling into the trap of arguing about the numbers. Well, how many are leaving? Are they leaving? Aren't they leaving? And then we're sort of like internalising it before we've actually understood exactly what's going on. So that the statistic is being used to have an argument about which statistic's right. What I'm saying is there is lots of evidence, and we've got some of it from research that we've done using wearable technology, that actually some young people who are joining policing have no idea how to cope with working shifts. I used to work shifts before I came in the police. It was a walk in the park for me. But it's a shock to the system if you're 21, 22. I know people who've joined the police. They're young, they're 22. There's somebody, I won't say it on here, but she's got an amazing story. After being involved in the MEN, actually there, as a kid, her experience of policing was so good that when she grew up, she wanted to join. And she's joined on our patch. And she loves every minute of it. With it, your expectations are a lot higher than mine were. I didn't have any expectations, right? And it's just as well because I got nothing. Their expectations, because they've come from a different culture, we've told these young people to talk about mental health, to destigmatise it. And they're coming in and they're going, whoa, hold on a minute. That doesn't look right. Can I have some support? Now, they don't all want therapy. What they want is just a sergeant to have a cup of tea with them and go, are you all right? It's human behaviour, this stuff, Dave. It's free half of it. You've got to keep getting this message across that the vast majority, right, if people are going to come in the job and say, right, for 26 grand, I could sell shoes on old trainers on Vinted and make that, and I'm not going to work 5 shifts and have to work nights 2 weekends in 5. It's just not working out for me. What we should just say to them is, fine, no hard feelings. But we're sort of like beating ourselves up yet again about something. And you could say, there are a proportion of people who've joined the job not realising what they're letting themselves in for, and it's been a mistake. Let them go as soon as possible. I saw people, Dave, that I joined with day one, who sat with their feet up doing nothing for 30 years. You've worked with plenty of them. I wish they'd have gone after 2 years. Maybe a bit of higher turnover is good for the blood. That is what I'm saying. Are you with me? Don't immediately leap to a conclusion that a bit more turnover is like we've got to find someone to blame for it. There are lots of reasons why that is happening. Some of it is organisational responsibility. Some of it is just a change in attitudes to work. And we are still one of the lowest turnover sectors on the planet. My argument is nobody's worked out what a good turnover rate for policing is yet. Is it 10%? Is it 6%? But let's stop arguing about it and try to get to the root of what the problem is. I can tell you now, in the Merseyside Police have done amazing work on this. We work with new recruits there with wearable technology, and you could see on their data before they went into operational deployment, the people who were looking at it were going, this is not going to be good, right? Because they are not aware of how they need to adjust the lifestyle to cope with shifts. Shift work is not good for your health, right? And you have to do things differently with your life, cope with it. I had 2 young children when I was working shifts. My wife was working. And I was falling asleep after night, so we used to finish at 6 then, didn't we? And I was like driving my kids to school, like after doing 7 nights on the bounce, some of them 12 hours, horrendous levels of fatigue. And I cope with it. It's probably taken a toll on my health. It's probably taken a toll on your health. It does. We're not doing anything with new recruits to teach them how to cope with shift work. That should just be an obvious thing that everybody should be doing. That's what we're going to try to do. And we're going to help them get those systems and those materials in place for people.
Finally, I just want to, and thanks for donating your time today, and it's hit the news. Professional standards, officers under investigation. I know the PCC of Hampshire, I think it is, asked for a review into her own PSD and the way they conduct themselves. It's a problem, isn't it?
There is a definite link between misconduct and suicide, from the figures, which aren't collected as well as they should be. But that's another thing that the Chief Medical Officer and other people in policing are trying to improve, and we will improve. The other thing that's happened, of course, Dave, is there is a big drive to improve standards. In policing, when that happens, more people are going to be investigated and more people are going to be suspended. And so you've got more people who need more welfare wraparound, pretty intensive welfare wraparound actually, being pushed into a system that probably hasn't got that welfare wraparound sorted out well enough. So it's a classic case of not anticipating that is going to require another part of the organisation to have more resource and more support to deal with it. Now, we've been seeing this coming for a few years, and there are some forces who are doing a lot around welfare support, training mental health peer supporters specifically for that stuff, and they're trying to get better at it. But what we're saying is there needs to be a minimum standard of welfare support for people under investigation as part of our overall approach to suicide prevention. So it's not correct to say that every suicide of a serving officer or member of staff is directly linked to police work. It's also not correct to say that it isn't. It's another thing, Dave, that we shouldn't be arguing about. And so I think it's 2025. We need to look at the nature of the work that people do, the pressure that they're under. If there's a suicide of a serving officer or member of staff, we should start from the position of there has been some work-related contribution towards this. And particularly if there's a work-related intervention into that person, like a misconduct investigation. That is a duty of care issue, clear and simple, and people know that. You know what it's like, Dave. These investigations can go on for years. People are getting investigated for things now because there's a drive on standards and misconduct, quite rightly, because we've had some horrendous behaviour, haven't we, and continue to have. Within that, there are people getting investigated for things that didn't even exist when you and I joined the job because nobody had iPhones. They're in the public eye a lot. The accountability level is through the roof. That's our position on it, right? So one of the things that we've pushed and accelerate to get the crisis line in for is that we know we'll get calls from people who've been served forms at every rank, actually. I'm serious, every rank, up to chief officers. It's a hugely stressful experience. And that is part of our duty of care. So we're contributing in one way that we can by standing up what is a fairly complicated and expensive part of our budget that we've taken money from elsewhere to do. The Home Office and everybody else is supporting us to get this funded longer term because you can't put a number out there and then stop it. And that is the same type of service that the fire service and the ambulance service have. It's been forged in blue light services, this service, yeah. And what we'll get as well, because it's a confidential service, 100%, we do get, right, how many people have called and some themes. And for the first time ever, we'll get over time, what is the scale of this problem? How many people are calling our line who are in crisis? And why are they in crisis? And that will give us extra evidence around what the extent of the problem is.
I mean, I feel very strongly about it. I mean, I used to work on child protection And it was a unique role in that, well, any investigation, safeguarding was part of the investigation strategy. And yes, of course, you would safeguard the victim. But in child protection issues, you'd be safeguarding the suspect as well, because not everybody's guilty. And so there was that standard of care, of safeguarding, which police officers, I don't think, under investigation get that same standard.
You're spot on. We are playing catch up with it. So we haven't anticipated the amount of people who need more welfare support because of misconduct investigations. But there's some forces doing some outstanding work on this. Right? And everybody needs to be doing well as they are. And we're saying that at the highest levels, and people are listening to us. One of the things that if you're suspended, particularly, that is an even more high risk because you're outside of the organisation and your ability to maintain support starts to dilute. And we have got a lot more people being suspended now than we used to have. And so once you move somebody out of the workplace, your ability to actually maintain some level of support for them starts to dilute significantly. And that's a concern. And, I think one of the things that you will need to look at with this, it's fine having a standard, again, around what welfare support, but what is the capacity of the force to actually put it into place? They are not awash with people to do this type of work. But I would be saying if this is a large number of people, I might need to be, as the employer, the chief constable, looking at bringing an independent service in that would support those people when they're not in the workplace. Because the reality of it is, Dave, there's no point saying to Sergeant Thomas that PC Rhodes off your shift, who you've only known for 5 minutes because you've been on the shift 3 months and you came from somewhere else. It's your job, Dave, to manage his welfare when you're running around Blackburn with 20 new recruits on your shift and you're just glad they're going to get home at 10 o'clock at night. You haven't got the time to ring people up. And also, you might be part of that investigation. So it's like there's all sorts of problems with trying to fix this that need to be addressed. Now, what I'm saying is Oscar Keeler has got a role in that, but we don't control investigations. We have no input, or there's nothing we can do to help a force that's not got enough resource around this, for example. I think it does need, because of the suicide risk, this needs to be taken seriously. There are 3 big issue-related health issues, if that makes sense, Dave, that's on our radar. One is women's health, right, which, again, we're on a journey with, and it's a slow journey. We're recruiting more females into policing, which is a good thing. But what have we done about flexible working? Who's talking about the menopause, perimenopause, and all this sort of stuff? Right, it's not enough understanding of those issues. The other one is new recruits, 0 to 3 years. If we don't max out on their welfare support, more of them are going to walk, and we've got evidence of that. And some of them are going to walk because we haven't given them enough support to cope, not just because they're not fit for the job, right? The third one is misconduct welfare. Because, I think the service getting itself into order around misconduct is something that's going to continue. Therefore, again, we need to be adapting to that and looking at what's the best way to support the welfare of the people who quite often come back to work, right? Because they don't get dismissed at the end of it, and quite a lot of people are investigated just doing the job, aren't they? You know that from pursuits and all the sort of stuff you used to do. You've got to be able to, if you put yourself in harm's way, which is also very much, if this goes wrong, am I going to be backed up? Again, our survey asked that question. Would I feel supported if I made an honest mistake in my job? Higher up the organisation, you've got 70, 80%, yeah. When you get down to PCs, it's something like 16%. That's the big worry for us, is that people stop putting themselves in those positions because they think, hold on a minute, I'm not going to get back to it if this is wrong.
And it kind of goes full circle and goes back to going to see your sergeant. I've got a problem. If there's only 16% think the force are going to back them up, they're less likely to go and see the sergeant.
My take on it is, Dave, is from my experience, 30 years, there's a lot of people commenting on this who haven't done 30 years in policing. My experience of it is when it's an operational issue, that genuinely something's gone wrong and you're behind the 8 ball for it. Okay, there are other external forces pressuring on the force, but generally the force is trying to be as supportive as they can for that individual. It's when it's the misconduct stuff, particularly things like sexual misconduct, there is understandably and rightly a zero tolerance for it given what's happened. we have to be honest, and say we are a public service that's to be trusted by victims. And if this sexual misconduct stuff isn't removed from the job, now how we're going about that is in the police way, right? It's head on. Somebody said to me the other day, so you've got a hammer, all you see is nails. All I'm saying is that there's some really good packages that force are putting around people now, but not everywhere's doing it. That's another thing that we're trying to pick up and improve. I've got emails, I've got answers today from people going, where do I get some good practice around this? I need to do more. If you didn't have us a kilo, there'd be nobody to ask. So, I'm not doing a big sort of like cheerleading job for us. What I'm trying to say is, there are lots of different things that we do that don't get airtime. We do it in a very supportive but strong, passionate, well-informed way, because otherwise nobody listens to you.
Well, I always enjoy our conversations. Thank you very much. The whole range of problems there that are going to keep the police busy for the next couple of years, I don't doubt. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for inviting me, Dave. Nice to see you again.
DCT Audio. The art of good listening.